A 12-year-old boy shouldn't see a giant cry. It's not right. It upsets the natural order of things. Giants are supposed to be made of stone and leather and dust, not tears. But Timothy Crawford saw it. On a blazing hot afternoon, in the middle of nowhere, he saw a man bigger than any he'd ever imagined, kneeling in the dirt, his massive shoulders shaking. The man wasn't crying for himself. He was crying for his horse. The boy, Timothy, had nothing to his name but worn-out boots and a heart full of stories. He was on his way to his thinking spot, a dry creek bed where he dreamed of being a hero in one of those stories. His father's Bible was tucked under his arm, the pages filled with his own little drawings of brave men on horseback. And then he heard the voice. A low rumble, like distant thunder, but soft, gentle. He crept over a small rise, and the world stopped. The man was a mountain, 6.5 feet tall even sitting down, with a face that looked like it had been carved from the canyon walls. Scars crisscrossed his skin, a roadmap of a hard life. A gun belt hung on his hips like it was part of him. This was the kind of man his mother warned him about. The kind of man who drifted through the territory leaving trouble in his wake. But this man was tending to a beautiful chestnut mare, laid out on her side, her breath coming in ragged gasps. One of her legs was bent at an angle that made Timothy's stomach hurt just to look at it. "Easy there, Belle," the giant murmured, his huge, scarred hands stroking her neck with a tenderness that didn't fit his dangerous appearance. "We'll figure something out. We always do." This wasn't just a cowboy and his horse. This was family. Timothy watched, frozen, clutching his Bible. The man's eyes, when they lifted from the mare, were the color of storm clouds. They were the eyes of a predator, weary and watchful, but they were also filled with tears. Not loud, messy sobs, just quiet tears, rolling down his weathered cheeks, telling a story of too much loss. The man reached into his vest, pulling out a tarnished silver pocket watch. He snapped it open, stared at whatever was inside, and his jaw tightened. "Ain't giving up on you, Belle," he said, his voice cracking just a little. "You saved my hide more times than I can count. Time I return the favor." Something inside Timothy broke. He couldn't just stand there. He couldn't just walk away. His mother's warnings were a faint whisper against the roar of compassion in his heart. He took a step forward. "Mister?" The word was barely a squeak, but in the dead silence of the desert, it was a gunshot. The giant's head snapped up. His hand flew to his pistol, freezing only when he saw it was just a boy. A skinny, dirt-poor farm boy. "Boy!" The stranger's voice was flat, empty of emotion. "You best move along. This ain't no place for children." Timothy didn't move. He couldn't. "Your horse. She's hurt bad." "Nothing you can do about it, son. This is between me and Belle." The man's tone was gruff, a wall built to keep the world out. "Maybe I can help." A harsh laugh escaped the giant's lips. "Help? Boy, you don't weigh more than a sack of wet grain. What makes you think you can help?" Timothy's face burned, but he held his ground. "My pa says sometimes the smallest hands can reach places the big ones can't." The giant stared at him for a long, silent moment. His storm cloud eyes seemed to look right through Timothy, weighing him, measuring him. The silver pocket watch was still clutched in his hand. Finally, he spoke. "Name's Donovan Kane, and this here is Belle." "I'm Timothy Crawford," the boy said, stepping closer, "and I think she's got something stuck in her hoof." Donovan's eyebrows shot up. He looked at his own massive hands, then back at the boy. His fingers were too thick. He couldn't get a grip without spooking the injured mare. "I could try," Timothy offered, his voice quiet but sure. Donovan studied him again, then gave a slow, reluctant nod. "All right, Timothy Crawford, but you do exactly what I say." Timothy set his Bible carefully on a rock and knelt by the horse. He murmured to her, his voice a soft echo of Donovan's, and Belle's ears twitched. Something in the boy's touch seemed to calm her. His small, nimble fingers explored the hoof, gentle and confident. There, he breathed. It's a piece of shale, wedged in deep. With a grunt of concentration, his tongue poking out the side of his mouth, Timothy worked the sharp rock free. He held it up, a jagged piece of stone the size of a silver dollar. Got it. Belle let out a long sigh. With Donovan's help, she struggled to her feet. She tested the leg, took a hesitant step, and then another. The agonizing limp was gone. Donovan stared at Timothy, his face a mask of disbelief. I'll be damned, he whispered. Boy, you just saved my horse. Maybe saved both our lives. Weren't nothing special, Timothy mumbled, embarrassed by the praise. Don't you diminish what you did. Donovan's voice was firm, his eyes serious. Most folks would have walked on by, but you didn't. That says something about the man you're gonna become. The words hit Timothy like a bolt of lightning. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Like he was already more than just a boy. Donovan swung into his saddle, a towering figure from one of Timothy's stories. Timothy Samuel Crawford, he said, touching the brim of his hat. I'm in your debt. I don't forget kindness. And I don't forget debts. And with that, he was gone, disappearing around a bend in the creek bed, leaving Timothy standing alone with a pounding heart and a strange sense of destiny. That single act of kindness was a pebble tossed into a pond. But the ripples were about to become a tidal wave. 3 days later, the giant was back. Timothy had returned to the creek bed every morning, telling himself it was just his thinking spot, but his heart knew better. He was waiting. Donovan rode in not with the easy gait of a traveler, but with the coiled tension of a man being hunted. His eyes never stopped moving, scanning the horizon, searching for threats. Timothy, he said, dismounting before Belle had even stopped. I was hoping I might run into you. Is everything all right, Mr. Donovan? The giant didn't answer right away. His hand rested on the grip of his pistol. Finally, he seemed to make a decision. Boy, I'm going to show you something, and I need you to understand the importance of keeping it to yourself. From his saddlebag, he pulled a weathered piece of leather. He unfolded it, revealing a hand-drawn map. This, Donovan said, his voice low and urgent, shows the way to something that's been waiting a long time to be found. Something that could change a lot of lives for the better. Timothy's eyes widened. Treasure? Of a sort, Donovan said. Confederate gold, hidden during the war, meant to help families who lost everything. It was the stuff of legends, lost Civil War treasure, and the map was right here, in Donovan Kane's scarred hands. Why are you showing me this? Timothy asked, his voice a whisper. Because I might need your help, Donovan said, his eyes dark with a secret worry. And because there are others who know about this gold. Folks who don't have the same intentions I do. As if on cue, the sound of hoofbeats echoed from the ridge, distant, but getting closer. Get down, Donovan commanded, his voice sharp as a razor. Timothy dropped behind a cluster of sagebrush, his heart trying to hammer its way out of his chest. 3 riders appeared on the ridge, silhouetted against the morning sun. They looked hard, mean. The kind of men who lived by the gun and died by it. Kane! One of them shouted, his voice cutting through the desert air. We know you're down there! Donovan straightened up slowly, his hands resting on his gun belt. Murdoch, he called back, his tone dangerously calm. You boys are a long way from home. The leader, a man with a face like a hawk, urged his horse forward. You know damn well why we're here, Kane. That map belongs to its rightful owners. Donovan let out a dark, humorless chuckle. Rightful owners! Last I checked, Murdoch, you and your boys never fought for anything but your next drink. The tension was so thick Timothy could taste it. This was going to explode. "Hand over the map, Kane," Murdoch said, his lips twisting into a cold smile. "Or we can take it off your corpse. Makes no difference to us." And then it happened. Murdoch's hand dropped. Gunfire erupted, a deafening roar that shook the very ground. Timothy squeezed his eyes shut, pressing his face into the dirt. When the shooting stopped, a terrible silence fell. He cautiously raised his head. Donovan stood untouched, smoke curling from the barrel of his Colt. 2 of Murdoch's men lay dead on the ground. Murdoch himself was still in the saddle, clutching a bloody shoulder, his face a mask of pain and fury. "Should have brought better men," Donovan said, his voice as cold as a grave. "These 2 were slow." "This ain't over, Kane," Murdoch snarled. "There's more of us. A lot more." He wheeled his horse around and galloped away, a wounded animal retreating to its lair. Timothy got to his feet, his legs shaking. He had never seen a man die before. Now he'd seen 2. Donovan had moved with a deadly efficiency that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. "What happens now?" Timothy asked, his voice trembling. Donovan looked down at him, his storm-gray eyes filled with a heavy sadness. "Now, boy, I've got to move fast. Murdoch wasn't lying. They'll be coming hard." He paused, studying Timothy's face. "Question is, what do you want to do?" "What do you mean?" "I mean," Donovan said, his voice gentle but firm, "you've seen what this is. You've seen what I'm willing to do. If you want to walk away right now, go back to your family and forget any of this ever happened, I wouldn't blame you one bit." Timothy looked at the saddlebag where the map was hidden. He looked at the dead men on the ground. He thought of the families the gold was meant for. He thought of his own family, struggling to survive. He looked at Donovan, a lone man standing against a tide of violence and greed. "I want to come with you," he said, the words stronger and more certain than any he had ever spoken. "Timothy, you don't understand." Donovan shook his head. "This isn't one of your stories. Those men will kill you without a second thought." "I understand," Timothy insisted. "But you said you might need my help. And maybe this is my story." Donovan studied him for a long moment, a silent battle raging in his eyes. Finally, he gave a slow nod. "All right, Timothy Samuel Crawford, but there's no turning back. You do what I say when I say it, and you understand. There's a good chance neither one of us is coming back from this." Timothy's hand went to the Bible tucked against his ribs. "I understand," he said. "And I'm ready." As Donovan lifted him onto Belle's back, Timothy took one last look at his family's small, weathered cabin in the distance. When he saw it again, if he saw it again, the boy who lived there would be gone forever. The desert was a different world when you were being hunted. Every shadow looked like a man with a gun. Every gust of wind sounded like hoofbeats. Timothy had thought he knew hardship, but this was survival. Raw and unforgiving. Donovan was a master of this world. He moved through the harsh landscape like he was born to it. He taught Timothy how to find water where there was none, how to read the secrets of the land in the flight of a bird or the color of a rock. "During the war," Donovan said, his voice distant, "knowing the land was the difference between livin' and dyin'." He tapped the battered army-issue compass that never left his side. "This thing guided me through battles that never should have been fought. It taught me that sometimes a man's got to choose his own direction." That first night, under a blanket of stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, the weight of their mission truly settled on Timothy. "How do you know the gold is still there?" he asked. Donovan's eyes were fixed on the campfire flames. "Because I was there when it was buried," he said, his voice heavy with memory. "I was one of the men who helped hide it." The twist hit Timothy like a physical blow. "You were a Confederate soldier?" Was, Donovan confirmed, until I couldn't be anymore. Until I realized some things matter more than flags and causes. He looked at Timothy, his gaze intense. The other men who knew, they're all dead. I'm the only one left, son, which makes me a very dangerous man to know. They weren't just carrying a map, they were carrying the last hope of countless families. Timothy's own struggles seemed so small in comparison. 3 days into their journey, they rode into a landscape of towering red rock formations that looked like the bones of the earth. It was there they met the 3 riders. They looked like ordinary cowboys, tired and dusty. But Donovan tensed, his hand moving to his gun. "Mornin'," the lead rider called out. "Name's Patterson. We're heading north. You wouldn't happen to be Donovan Kane, would you?" The question hung in the air, deadly and sharp. And Timothy understood. These weren't travelers. They were hunters. Donovan's Colt appeared in his hand. Gunfire thundered, echoing off the canyon walls. When the smoke cleared, Patterson was dead. His 2 partners were a cloud of dust on the horizon, fleeing for their lives. "How did you know?" Timothy whispered, his stomach churning. "He knew my name," Donovan said grimly, searching the dead man's belongings. "That was his mistake." He pulled a bullet-riddled cavalry saddle from Patterson's horse. It was old, scarred from battle. "This belonged to a good man once," Donovan said, his voice thick with an old pain. "A man who died fighting for what he believed in. Seeing it on scum like Patterson, it's like spitting on his grave." The mood had changed. The adventure was gone, replaced by a grim reality. They were no longer just running. They were being systematically hunted by an enemy with long arms and a deep well of information. "How many more will there be?" Timothy asked. "As many as it takes," Donovan replied. "Word's gotten out. Every gun for hire between here and Mexico is going to be looking for us." They made a cold camp that night. No fire to give away their position. The easy camaraderie of their first days was gone, replaced by the silent understanding of 2 soldiers in enemy territory. Timothy lay awake, staring at the stars, the weight of their mission pressing down on him. The gold wasn't just treasure anymore. It was hope. It was a promise to the fallen. And he was now a guardian of that promise, riding alongside a man who carried the ghosts of a war in his sad, storm-gray eyes. This was no longer a boy's adventure. It was a man's duty. And the price of failure was more than just their own lives. The border town of Esperanza was a festering sore on the face of the desert, a place where desperate men came to forget, and dangerous men came to hunt. "Stay close, son," Donovan murmured as they rode down the dusty main street. "In a place like this, information is more valuable than gold, and twice as dangerous." They stopped at McKenna's trading post. The owner, a burly Irishman with watchful eyes, looked up as they entered. "Well, well," he said, a grim smile on his face. "If it isn't the famous Donovan Kane. Heard you might be passing through." The air crackled with tension. "Word travels fast," Donovan said, his voice casual, but his body was coiled like a spring. "It does indeed," McKenna agreed, "especially when there's a bounty involved. A big one." He pulled a faded photograph from his vest pocket. It was a picture of a younger Donovan in a military uniform, surrounded by other soldiers, all of them smiling like brothers. "This picture's been making the rounds," McKenna said. "A well-dressed fella came through a few days ago. Said he represented parties interested in settling old debts with you. Said there were others coming. Professional killers." Timothy stared at the photograph. He saw a different Donovan, one not yet carved by grief and loss. He saw hope. He saw brotherhood. "Those your fallen comrades?" McKenna asked gently. Donovan just nodded, his jaw tight. He looked at McKenna. "I need supplies and information." "Of course," McKenna said, his eyes filled with a deep, unspoken understanding. But Donovan, whatever you're trying to accomplish, is it worth dying for? Donovan looked at Timothy, then back at the photograph of his friends. It is, he said, his voice absolute. While they gathered supplies, Timothy saw a newspaper article about the widows and orphans of the war, families left to starve by a government that had forgotten their sacrifice. The words on the page weren't just stories anymore. They were real. They were the reason they were risking everything. As they left, McKenna pulled Donovan aside. Take care of that boy, Timothy heard him say. He's got a good heart. Don't let this business destroy it. Riding out of Esperanza, the danger felt closer than ever. The hunters weren't just faceless outlaws anymore. They were organized, they were professionals, and they had Donovan's face on a photograph. Mr. McKenna, you served with him, didn't you? Timothy asked. We did, Donovan confirmed. He was one of the few men I trusted with my life. When he says there are professional killers on our trail, I believe him. Aren't you scared? Terrified, Donovan admitted, his honesty startling Timothy. But not for myself. I've lived my life. You're just a boy. I put you in this danger. Timothy thought for a long moment. This isn't just about treasure, is it? He said, finally understanding. It's about keeping faith with those soldiers in the photograph. It's about making sure their sacrifice meant something. Donovan looked at him, a flicker of amazement in his eyes. You're growing up fast, son. Maybe too fast, Timothy said. But maybe that's what's needed right now. That night, camped by a small stream, Timothy couldn't get the image of the photograph out of his mind. All those young men, full of hope, now gone. Only Donovan was left, carrying their legacy on his massive shoulders. It was a burden that would crush most men. But Donovan Kane was not most men, and Timothy was beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't just a boy anymore either. The landscape changed, becoming a sacred ancient place of red rock cathedrals. This was Apache land, and the Apache were waiting for them. 3 riders appeared on a ridge, still as the stone around them. Easy, son, Donovan murmured, his voice filled with a rare respect. We're in their territory now. We go only where they allow. The lead rider, an old man with a face like a dried riverbed, guided his pony toward them. A black obsidian arrowhead hung around his neck. You are the one they call Kane, the elder said, his English clear. The one who carries the burden of his fallen brothers. A chill went down Timothy's spine. How could he know? The desert speaks to those who know how to listen, the old man, Wise Crow, explained. It tells of a man seeking to honor the dead, and a boy whose heart burns with the fire of justice. It tells of others following, men whose spirits are dark with greed. Donovan asked for passage. The question is not your intentions, Wise Crow replied, but your worthiness. The place you seek is sacred. His dark eyes settled on Timothy. My grandson says the boy carries no darkness in his heart. The old man dismounted and approached Timothy. He took the ancient arrowhead from his own neck and placed it over Timothy's head. You will carry this now, young one. The spirits have whispered that you will need its guidance before your journey ends, because you are walking a path that will test not just your courage, but your soul. Timothy felt the weight of the stone against his chest. It was warm, as if it held a living fire. Wise Crow turned back to Donovan, his expression grave. The men who follow you are close, less than a day behind. There are 12, perhaps 15 of them, well armed. He pointed to a narrow, treacherous-looking canyon. There is a path through the stone maze. It will hide you. Few white men have ever walked it and lived. The price? Donovan asked. Only a promise, Wise Crow said. Promise that when you find what you seek, you will remember that some things are more precious than gold. I promise, Donovan said without hesitation. Before leaving, the elder looked at Timothy one last time. The path ahead will change you. You began this journey as a boy seeking adventure. You will end it as a man who understands the weight of responsibility. As they guided Belle into the narrow canyon, the rock walls rising like a fortress around them, Timothy felt the world shift. This was no longer just about running and fighting. It was something more. Something ancient and spiritual. Behind them, a pack of killers was closing in. Ahead, a path of ghosts and legends. And around his neck, a piece of the sacred earth. A promise of transformation he was only just beginning to understand. He was no longer just a boy following a giant. He was part of a story that had been written in the stones long before he was born. Inside the stone maze, time seemed to bend. The air was thick with spirits and silence. It was here, in a hidden chamber covered with ancient carvings, that Donovan Kane finally revealed his deepest secret. Timothy saw him staring at something in his hand. It wasn't the watch or the photograph. It was a medal, a gold star on a faded blue ribbon. Even at 12, Timothy knew what it was. "That's a Medal of Honor," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "That means you're a hero." Donovan's laugh was a bitter, broken sound. "Hero. That's what they called me. Said I saved 43 men at Antietam Creek." He stood and traced the ancient symbols on the rock wall. His voice dropped, heavy with a pain that was 15 years old. "What they didn't say was that I disobeyed direct orders to do it. They didn't say that I abandoned my post." He turned to face Timothy, and the boy saw tears glistening in the giant's eyes. "Timothy," he said, and the words changed everything. "The treasure we're seeking, it's not what you think it is." The world tilted on its axis. "What do you mean?" "The Confederate gold is real," Donovan said. "But that's not why I'm here. Those families I told you about, the ones who lost everything, they weren't Southern families, son. They were Union families." Timothy stared, his mind reeling. None of this made sense. "After the war, I saw the families of the men who fought and died for the Union being left to starve. The government promised them pensions, but the money never came. Good people, honorable people, who'd already sacrificed everything." Donovan's hand closed around the medal. "That's when I decided that Confederate gold, money meant to fund a war I'd come to see as wrong, could serve a better purpose." His confession came out in a rush of pain and defiance. "I deserted my post. I stole the map from the military archives. I set out to use that treasure to help the families who really needed it. The families of the men I fought alongside." The pieces crashed together in Timothy's mind, forming a picture that was both terrible and beautiful. But that makes you a traitor," he whispered. "A deserter," Donovan finished quietly. "An outlaw. A wanted man." A fire ignited in Timothy's chest, a fierce, righteous anger. "No," he said, his voice ringing with a conviction that surprised them both. "That makes you even more of a hero than the medal does." Donovan looked at him, stunned. "How can you say that? I broke my oath." "You broke rules to help people." Timothy shot back, his hand instinctively going to the arrowhead at his throat. "You risked everything to do what was right, even when it meant giving up everything you had." "The law sees it differently," Donovan said, a faint, sad smile on his lips. "So do the men hunting us. They're not just after treasure, Timothy. They're bounty hunters. They're after a decorated war criminal who's been evading justice for a decade." The full weight of it all slammed into Timothy. The bounty hunters, McKenna, the photograph. It wasn't just about greed. It was about a government bounty on the head of a man they called a hero and a traitor in the same breath. "How many families have you helped?" Timothy asked, his voice soft. 47. So far. This gold. It could help 100 more. Donovan looked him straight in the eye. But son, you need to understand. If we're caught, I'll hang. And you'll be branded my accomplice. There's no going home after this. Not for either of us. Timothy thought of his father's words, about character being measured by the choices a man makes when no one is watching. He looked at Donovan, a man who had sacrificed his honor, his reputation, and his freedom to keep a private, sacred promise to the fallen. He was in the presence of true heroism. The messy, complicated, heartbreaking kind that stories never tell you about. Wise Crow said this journey would change me from a boy into a man. Timothy said, his voice steady. Maybe learning that sometimes doing what's right means you can't go home again. Maybe that's part of it. Donovan's face softened, the lines of pain easing for just a moment. I won't let anything happen to you, son, whatever it costs. And I won't let you face this alone, Timothy replied, his voice unwavering. We're partners. We see this through together. Whatever comes. As they rode deeper into the maze, Timothy knew he was no longer following a treasure hunter. He was riding with a saint disguised as an outlaw, on a mission so just, so pure, that it made a mockery of the laws it broke. He was an accomplice, a fugitive, a boy on the run, and he had never been more certain that he was on the right side. They were close. So close. The air itself seemed to hum with anticipation. On the 9th day, they stopped at a hidden spring, a sliver of life in the stone desert. 3 hours to the treasure site, Donovan said, his voice grave. Timothy, this is it. Your last chance to turn back. Once we dig up that gold, we're thieves in the eyes of the law. Forever. Timothy didn't hesitate. He thought of the 47 families, the 100 more waiting. He thought of the photograph of Donovan's fallen comrades. He gathered pieces of dried wood and fashioned them into a rough cross. He planted it in the sand by the spring and knelt before it, his hand clutching the Apache arrowhead. I promise, he said, his voice echoing in the quiet clearing, to see this through. Not for adventure, but because sometimes doing what's right is more important than doing what's safe. Donovan watched, his face a mixture of pride and profound sorrow. The boy was gone. In his place stood a young man of impossible moral courage. That's when they heard it. The faint, unmistakable sound of horses. Many horses. Moving fast. They found our trail, Donovan said, his hand dropping to his gun. They're closer than I thought. Voices carried on the wind, harsh, urgent. The hunters were upon them. How many? Timothy asked, surprised at the calmness in his own voice. Too many, Donovan answered, already moving, his actions economical and swift. We have maybe 20 minutes. We have to get to the treasure site first. And then what? Donovan looked at him, his eyes filled with a fierce, terrible resolve. Then we make our stand, son. We dig up that gold, and we defend it with everything we have. They rode like the devil was on their heels, pushing Belle to her absolute limit. The landscape blurred into a nightmare of rock and sand. Finally, they crested a ridge and saw it, a natural amphitheater, a single massive boulder standing like an altar in its center. That's it, Donovan breathed. That's the place. They dug with frantic energy, their shovels tearing at the sun-baked earth. 20 minutes of desperate labor, and then a thud. Wood. They wrestled a heavy iron-bound chest from the ground. It was real. After 15 years of waiting, of running, of helping in secret, the hope of 100 families was right here, in their hands. And then the hunters arrived. Well, well, a familiar sneering voice called from the ridge above. If it isn't the famous Donovan Kane. It was Murdoch, and this time he'd brought an army, at least a dozen men, their guns glinting in the sun, fanned out along the ridge, trapping them. Murdoch's arm was in a sling, but his eyes burned with hate. "You're outnumbered 12-1, Kane," Murdoch jeered. "There's no fancy shooting that's gonna get you out of this." Donovan straightened up slowly, every line of his body screaming defiance. "He's not a deserter!" Timothy shouted, his young voice ringing across the amphitheater. "He's a hero! More of a hero than any of you will ever be." Murdoch's eyes narrowed into slits of cold fury. "The boy's got spirit. Too bad he chose the wrong side. Surrender now, Kane, and maybe we'll let the kid live. Keep fighting, and I guarantee he dies with you." Donovan looked at Timothy, and in that moment, the boy saw something in the giant's eyes that took his breath away. It was a fierce, protective love. The love of a father for a son he never had. "Timothy," Donovan said, his voice quiet amidst the tension. "Whatever happens next, know that meeting you has been the greatest privilege of my life." Tears stung Timothy's eyes, but he blinked them back. This was no time for grief. It was time for courage. "So have you," he said firmly. "And we're not finished yet." "Last chance, Kane," Murdoch yelled. "Surrender or we come down shooting." Donovan drew his Colt. Timothy clutched the arrowhead in his palm until his knuckles were white. "Then come ahead." Donovan's voice was a low growl. "But understand this. This chest contains the hopes and dreams of families who have already sacrificed everything. You'll have to kill us both before you touch it." The desert held its breath. 12 guns against one. Greed against justice. In the next second, all hell broke loose. The world exploded in a storm of lead and thunder. Timothy dove behind the treasure chest as bullets screamed past him, chipping away at the ancient stones. Donovan's rifle answered, a methodical, deadly rhythm of fire. Each shot was a punctuation mark in a story of defiance. "Stay low, son!" Donovan yelled over the chaos. Timothy pressed himself against the wood, his heart a wild drum against his ribs. The arrowhead in his hand felt hot, pulsing with a strange energy. He wasn't just a scared boy hiding, he was a spotter, a second pair of eyes. "3 of them! Moving left!" he shouted. Donovan's rifle barked. A man screamed and fell. "Good eyes, son! Keep watching our flanks!" They were a team, a 2-man army against impossible odds. The giant and the boy, fighting back to back for the soul of a nation. The battle raged, a stalemate of skill against numbers. But time was not on their side. Donovan's ammunition was dwindling, and a dark stain of blood was spreading on his left sleeve. He was hit. Just as Timothy saw the blood, he saw something else. Something that made his own blood run cold. 2 of Murdoch's men had circled around. They were climbing down the canyon wall, directly behind them. "Mr. Donovan, behind us!" Donovan spun, but it was too late. The first man was on the canyon floor, his pistol leveled, aimed straight at Donovan's heart. There was no time to think, no time for fear. There was only instinct and love. Timothy launched himself forward. He threw his body in front of Donovan's just as the bounty hunter's gun roared. Pain, white hot and blinding, ripped through his shoulder. The force of the bullet spun him around, sending him crashing to the ground. The last thing he saw before the darkness swarmed was Donovan's face, twisted in a mask of unimaginable rage and grief. A roar of pure fury erupted from Donovan's throat, a sound that wasn't human. It was the sound of a heart breaking. His Colt bucked in his hand. Once. Twice. The 2 men who had flanked them were dead before they hit the ground. "Timothy!" Donovan was on his knees, his massive hands hovering over the boy's small, bleeding form. "Son!" "Why?" "Had to," Timothy gasped, the world fading in and out. "Couldn't let them hurt you. Too many families counting on us." The sight of Timothy's blood soaking into the sand changed Donovan. The strategic soldier was gone. In his place was an angel of vengeance. "Murdoch!" His voice boomed, shaking the very stones of the canyon. "You want this treasure? Come and take it. but I swear on this boy's life, every man who tries will die." The gunfire from the ridge faltered. They heard it in his voice, the absolute certainty of death. Donovan gently moved Timothy to a safer spot, then threw open the treasure chest. Amidst the stacks of gold, Timothy saw them. Letters, hundreds of them. "What are those?" he whispered. "From the families." Donovan's voice was thick with emotion. "They write to thank me, to tell me their children are getting an education, that they have hope again." He read a line from one letter, from a widow named Sarah, whose son was now learning to read because of a gift from a stranger. "This is why," Timothy breathed, understanding everything in a flash of painful clarity. "This is why it's all worth it." "This is why," Donovan agreed, his eyes burning with a holy fire. "Touching scene, Kane?" Murdoch yelled, his voice laced with nervous bravado. "But the boy's bleeding out. Surrender now, and maybe we'll get him to a doctor." Timothy gripped Donovan's arm. "Don't," he urged. "Don't let them win. Finish it." Donovan looked into Timothy's eyes and saw courage that shamed armies. "I have a better idea, Murdoch," he called out. "You and me, right now. Winner takes all." Silence from the ridge. "What's the matter?" Donovan taunted. "Afraid to face one man?" Then he played his final card. He spoke not to Murdoch, but to his men. He told them what they were really fighting for. Not just gold, but the last hope of widows and orphans. "He's a deserter and a thief," Murdoch snarled. "He gave up everything to help people who needed it." Timothy cried out, his voice weak but clear. And that was the shot that truly ended the battle. The boy's words, pure and true, cut through the greed. One by one, Murdoch's men began to lower their guns. They holstered their weapons. They started to walk away. They were killers for hire, but they were not monsters. They would not kill a child to steal from widows. In minutes, Murdoch was left with only 3 loyal men. Abandoned and exposed, he made one last, desperate charge. It was over quickly. When the smoke cleared, Murdoch and his last few men were dead. The silence that fell was absolute. The bullet had passed clean through Timothy's shoulder. Donovan's battlefield medical skills saved his life. "You saved my life, son," Donovan said as he bandaged the wound. "But more than that, you saved those families. Your courage, it saved everything." Timothy managed a weak smile. "We saved them," he whispered. "Together." The journey home was slow. When they finally reached the creek bed where it all began, Timothy's father was waiting. He took one look at his son, no longer a boy, but a young man, scarred and weathered, and he understood. Donovan disappeared as quietly as he had arrived, but not before leaving a portion of the treasure, enough to save the Crawford farm and many others in their community. Soon, letters began to arrive from all across the country, from families whose lives had been transformed. Each one was a testament to their journey. Each one was a victory. Years passed. Timothy grew into a man known for his wisdom and integrity. He married, had children of his own, and told them the story of the giant named Donovan Kane. Not a story of treasure, but a story of what it truly means to be a hero. He taught them that sometimes the most important battles are fought for people you will never meet. 25 years later, a final letter arrived. It was from Donovan. "The work continues," it read. "Over 200 families helped. But your courage that day, son, reminded me why it all mattered. They gave me a medal for one day's bravery. But the real honor of my life has been knowing you." Timothy kept that letter with the others, in the journal he'd started as a boy on the run. The real treasure wasn't the gold. It was the hope it had bought. It was the legacy of a man who broke the law to uphold a higher one. He lived a long, full life, the Apache arrowhead always around his neck. And in the quiet desert evenings, he would remember that there comes a moment in every life when a single act of kindness can send ripples across the world, changing everything, forever. The story of the giant and the boy became a legend, a reminder that heroes aren't born. They are made in the moments when they choose to stand for something, no matter the cost. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe. Because every hero's journey starts with a single choice, and we have more stories of courage to share.